the trauma is not going to get cleared unless you actually access the memory. There's only so much you can do with visualizations and meditation and things like that before you actually have to go back into the memory and process it, because it's unprocessed material that's stuck in time.
Hello, my loves. Welcome back to the Lavendaire Lifestyle Podcast. It's Eileen. Today's episode is about somatic psychology, trauma healing, and the science behind the mind-body connection. So we chat about different therapy modalities and practices and the things we can implement ourselves to process old memories and heal from trauma. Our guest today is Dr. Brian Tierney. Dr. Brian Tierney bridges the gap between ancient magic and modern psychotherapy. As a professor of clinical neuroscience, psychological assessment, and psychopharmacology, Dr. Tierney introduces an innovative paradigm for trauma healing, somatic psychology, neuroscience, and social artistry in his upcoming book, Visionary Somatics. Hello, Brian. Welcome to the podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm well. Thanks, Eileen. Glad to be here.
Great. Okay, so let's start with your story. I think you have kind of an eclectic journey because there's like somatic psychology, there's dance. So what drew you to somatic approaches? And just tell us your story and what led you to where you are now.
Well, yeah, like a lot of healer types, what put me on the path was my own suffering, my own challenges. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I started to get some somatic symptoms in my body. So basically, anxiety or other traditional diagnoses in psychology can have these weird physical manifestations. So I started to feel like I had this weird sensation in my throat. So the medical doctors, checked everything out and everything was fine, but everything wasn't fine, And so I started to get really anxious about this somatic sensation in my body. And the medical community didn't really have anything to say about it besides you have gastroesophageal reflux disorder or whatever. And it was causing all this mental anguish for me. And I started to get really anxious, socially anxious and stuff like that. So that's when I started to get into the healing arts, acupuncture and hands-on healing approaches. And I benefited from those approaches a great deal. So I ended up training in them. And a lot of those approaches did have a kind of psychological orientation, even like a trauma resolution approach to working with bodies, in body work, working with the hands, touching bodies and so on. So I was a body worker, still am a body worker. But gradually I moved more and more into psychology and ended up getting my doctorate in somatic psychology, which is, essentially a body-mind psychotherapy. I'm a specialist in working on this bridge between the mind and the body. And I'm a trauma resolution specialist. So I have, I bring to the table, which is literally the table, the massage table. I'm a unique psychotherapist in the sense that I actually have people on a table, on a massage table, not like close off or anything like that. And I'm touching their nervous system and treating their nervous system while I do trauma resolution work. And that it's a unique offering for a psychotherapist these days.
Yeah. Let's rewind. Can you tell us what is bodywork? Is that what you're talking about that you're doing now? Like hands-on massage therapy, healing the nervous system?
Yeah, body work is a general term for, it's not working with cars, even though that term is used also for working with cars. But in general, it's, the wider manual therapies. So touching bodies,
Okay.
massage therapy. But the form that I use a lot is what I like to call stillness touch, which has its foundations in cranial osteopathy. So the osteopathic tradition. And stillness touch means there's nothing that's done to the body. We're not kind of like moving stuff around. It's just a gentle work with the nervous system where the hands aren't moving at all. And I'm essentially interfacing with the nervous system. The principle is that our bodies are already subject to enough information overload. So why add stimulation to an already overstimulated body? So it's kind of like, I like to think of it as like stillness touch is a way of providing a kind of noise cancellation function, like noise canceling headphones, so that the body can then settle more into that parasympathetic, anti-inflammatory space and really get into the healing zone, so that when we're talking and doing some of the trauma resolution work or psychotherapy work, then we have an environment, a noise canceled environment, so that we can process through things more effectively.
This leads to somatic psychology. Is that exactly what you're just talking about? And can you, for listeners who've never heard of that term, how do you explain it? How's it different from just talk therapy?
The word soma basically just means body. So somatic psychology is really just a fancy term for a psychology that relates directly with the body. Okay, so usually what that means is somatic psychologists work directly with the nervous system. That's a simple way to understand it. So we're mind body specialists. We're not just talking about, making interpretations about the family of origin and what happened developmentally and in your history, and interpreting and talking and talking. And that's the distinction between a somatic therapist and a regular run of the mill therapist, in the sense that we could just be talking heads forever and be just, making interpretations about family of origin or culture of origin and things like that. The somatic oriented therapist is bringing the work into stuff done. So like process work. So, hey, let's do stuff. Let's get up in gravity. Let's do some breathing exercises. Let's not just talk and make interpretations. Let's do stuff. So I like to give people homework so that they can exercise their brain, exercise new habits and stuff like that. So it's very pragmatic in that sense. So let's not just talk, let's do stuff. Let's retrain your nervous system and your body to perceive differently, and to run different habits. And that means directly interfacing with the body. And that's how it's different.
All right, my loves, time for a short break. The show is sponsored by Shopify. Have you ever had a vision that felt meant for the world? Turning that vision into reality can be overwhelming, but Shopify is here to help you take that next step with ease. With Shopify, you can create a store, manage everything in one place, and reach customers worldwide. It's intuitive and designed to support you every step of the way. Before using Shopify, managing the Lavendaire shop took up so much of my time. Now that everything is more streamlined, I can focus more on what truly matters, creating tools to help you create your dream life. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Your vision is meant to be seen, and Shopify is here to help you bring it to life. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TLL, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TLL to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/TLL. Yeah, and I want to let you know the reason why I love this topic is because in my own experience, healing from trauma, I realized so much of it is in your body, like releasing just different energies or different tense areas. There's so much that has to do with the body that I was like, oh yeah, just talking about your thoughts and just working on the mind is not enough, right? Like our nervous system involves the entire body. So tell us about the nervous system and how it reacts and how it stores traumas.
The classic way of thinking about it, or the easy way to think about it, is to start with the image of the gas and the brakes of a car. Okay, which is really just a metaphor for talking about the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is the nervous system where you don't have to think about or tell your heart to beat, right? Or tell your heart to beat faster when it's in a moment of anxiety. It's automatic. And so that's the gas when we get into a fear, and when we're afraid or something like that, the gas goes on. All sorts of responses happen in the brain and the rest of the body to mobilize the body to either fight or flee. Okay, so that's that, when you hear fight flight system, that's the sympathetic system of the autonomic nervous system. That's the gas. And then the brakes is the parasympathetic system. And the parasympathetic system reduces the pacing of your heart rate. So it slows down your heart. Okay. It's equated with the exhale cycle of the breath. It kind of just slows things down. So gas and brakes are a good way to think about it. So you have the fight flight system. So something scary happens and the body, like in 120 milliseconds, just like zing, steps on the gas. Okay. And we're ready to mobilize, to fight or to flee. Now, in really dangerous situations, there's another F word that's added, which is the freeze response. Okay. So the freeze response is like the body is mobilized to move, but it can't really move. Okay. And so the parasympathetic system, the brakes, isn't just about, okay, I feel safe and my heart rate can go down. There's also an emergency brakes. Okay. So when things get really, really dangerous, there can be kind of like this dissociative response. We hear dissociation a lot now in discourses about trauma. And that's the emergency brakes where the body is like, okay, and this happens in just a millisecond scale. It goes from this freezing to a rapid assessment about how dangerous the situation is. If it's extraordinarily dangerous, then the emergency brakes will be pulled. Okay. And we can have things like fainting. We can have like an extreme freeze where the body starts to go into kind of a collapse. But the long and short of that is if the emergency brake gets pulled, then we're going to start to see some of this dissociation stuff. What is dissociation? It's like not feeling like things are real. It's like, this kind of a profound spacing out dynamic. So the thing is that if trauma doesn't get cleared, then the body will just basically continue to project these defensive states. Too much gas or too much emergency brake. Okay. The nervous system will continually replay it on a loop so that things that are less and less objectively dangerous trigger the loop to keep on looping. Yep. Right. So the heart rate will go up, the gas will go on, and we could, it could be something that is radically blown out of proportion, something that's actually not dangerous. And this is what we see, right? Where something not that intense or not that objectively scary or not that dangerous will then get the trauma loop going. The gas will go on or their emergency brakes, and then it just keeps on running and running and running. And then the consequence of that, of course, is that the body just generally does not feel safe. Okay, the person doesn't feel safe. And then the work becomes providing an environment of safety again so that the loop can get broken and the nervous system can stop projecting danger into the future in perpetuity.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So you're saying that emergency brake is also part of the sympathetic nervous system?
Parasympathetic.
Oh, parasympathetic. Because sympathetic's fight or flight.
Sympathetics are fight or flight. That's the gas, the get up and go juice. Parasympathetics are generally when we're feeling safe and good, the rest and digest or the stay and play. But then the other side of the parasympathetics is an emergency brake.
I see. Just to protect the body for some reason.
Yep. So if you're a saber-toothed tiger and you're coming after me and your jaw is right there, your teeth are right there, the emergency brake will be pulled on me. My body will be flooded with the inner heroin that everybody has, the opioid system. And it's kind of like nature's compassion in that way. If I do die, it's not going to hurt as much if I have all these opioids going through my body. So that's the emergency brakes. Emergency brakes, we could die. So we're going to dissociate because this is just going to be too painful to feel.
Yeah, I understand. So you're saying a lot of people experience traumas of all different I guess, sizes, right? You have like big things and you have like mini traumas, but ultimately it puts you in this loop until you can release the trauma. And tell me, what does it mean? What does it look like or feel like you release trauma, right? Some people might say, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm healed." Like that was in the past. Tell us about, how do you know you've released trauma, or what is the process of releasing it?
There's like the EMDR method. I have a bunch of different tools that I use. So EMDR is a method that I was trained in, that I do use, kind of like my own style of it. And what that means is that pretty much, or what that looks like is that we use a kind of bilateral stimulation approach, which is like basically, have you heard of these brain gym exercises where you stimulate the different sides of your body back and forth, and you do like,
Mm-mm.
pat your head and rub your belly at the same time?
Mhm.
That's a brain gym exercise to kind
Okay.
of support neural integration between the two hemispheres of the brain. So we use a method of stimulating the brain back and forth by either getting the eyes moving, or we use tactile stimulation. So like, somebody taps on their knees, for example, while holding a traumatic memory in mind. And that's a way of getting into the memory networks of the brain to basically change them. Because the weird thing is that every time we access a memory, it changes. Did you know that?
No. What do you mean? Like we are changing the memory?
Every time a memory gets accessed, it changes based on what's happening in the atmosphere of where it was accessed in. So if I say, okay, Eileen, think about a time when you were 5 when you were really happy. Okay. And then you think about a time when you were 5 when you were really happy, and you tell me about, and we get into the detail of the scene, which is fundamental to my work, hashing out the details of the scene, because I want to be working directly with the brain. And the brain is very interested in what's happening spatially, what's happening around you. Okay. So, whatever method I'm using, I want to be in direct relationship with the brain. And if I want to do that, that means that I need to know that the brain is very spatial. Otherwise, it's just kind of pie in the sky. So here we are, and we're in either a good memory or a bad memory. And the first step really is to make it real for the brain so that the memory can be changed. Okay. So, what does it look like when a person is when this memory is a traumatic memory, and what does it look like when it releases? One of the principles, and I don't know how much time we'll have, but I'll give you one of the maybe one or two principles.
Yep.
One of the things that's seen a lot is what I call the thwarted impulse. Okay, now often in trauma, a lot of traumas are relational traumas. Okay, they happen in relationship, abuse, neglect, uh, where you see that a person kind of, they have their agency taken from them. They're subjugated. They're raped. Horrible things happen, and they don't have the agency to do something, to say something. So the body has an impulse to do something or say something. Okay. But because of the environment and because of the abuse, the nervous system and the body doesn't have a chance to communicate and express that. And these are intense, right? These are intense impulses that have to do with getting to safety. Okay. So you can see where I'm going with this thwarted impulse thing. Like we could take an example of, there's an abuser that is coming in from the left. As I said, the nervous system and the brain are very specific. So, all right, they came in through the left. So I noticed that the body in session is kind of like, I'm dramatizing it a little bit, but this is what happens with bodies, because brains and bodies are so specific. They're living a kind of protection against the left side, because that's where the abuser came from. So we get to the scene, right, where the abuser came in through the door on the left, okay, and their original impulse was to scream. but it wasn't. They didn't have an opportunity to do that. So their scream is held. It's held in the tissues of their body. It's held in the tissues of the throat and the jaw.
Yeah.
And how does that show up? It shows up, if that trauma isn't cleared, then that person over time will often it'll get worse, and they'll stop, expressing their truth.
Yeah.
And they'll subject themselves to more abuse because they'll lose their boundaries and so on. Okay. So I've developed a method where, I don't actually have to have people screaming in my office in order to release the thwarted impulse. So it doesn't look like, sometimes I do. I'll pass a person a pillow or whatever, and they'll scream into the pillow. But that was more like in the early days of my development. What I found is that really mental imagery done really, really well, when you bring a person into the trauma scene, gets those neural impulses firing. You have to do it well in order for it to work. But essentially what happens is that you get the person into the structure of the scene. They express what wasn't expressed, what wanted to be expressed. Okay. The scream. Okay. And then they feel a huge wave of relief after that. And then they're able to go out into their life and be a little bit more self-expressed. Okay. So that's just one example of how it would look like. The more extreme example from really extreme traumas look like sweating, okay, shaking, trembling, crying, okay, getting really cold. Often the limbs will get really, really cold. Yeah. That's when it's a really strong release, is the person will have very strong thermal responses, and sweating, getting really cold, and trembling.
So do you always try to set the scene and bring them to the memory? Is that what you're doing, as like let's say you're doing the hands-on and you're talking? Is that what you're doing at the same time through what you're saying? Is bringing them to the scene and
Yep. So the thing is that, the trauma literature and research basically holds that the trauma is not going to get cleared unless you actually access the memory.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much you can do with visualizations and meditation and things like that before you actually have to go back into the memory and process it, because it's unprocessed material that's stuck in time.
Yep.
So, it's important to know that each time, again, a memory gets accessed, it gets reconsolidated, it changes based on whatever's new in the environment that it was accessed in, i.e., you have a soothing touch, a gentle touch that isn't adding any information.
Yeah.
And you have a soothing voice that's talking you through the experience in a really slow way. Okay. And then essentially I do a lot of work with the third person consciousness as well, because it's important to get a little bit of distance from these really intense things. Okay. So, and pretty much everybody can do this. We do it all the time, actually, is to be able to see a memory from the outside, and that provides some distance for people so that they don't get overwhelmed. So yeah, that's what's happening. We're a scene construction phase, and we're getting thick descriptions out so that the memory can be replayed with the presence of something new. And so then the memory changes.
Yeah. Going back to the changing of the memory. So you're saying accessing that old scene, it's because you're adding elements of feeling safe and maybe the third perspective element as well, that's how the scene changes. If someone were to try to like change a memory themselves, like how would you advise them to like create that safe space for themselves?
I think that the bilateral stimulation stuff helps. So going for a walk, you have this back and forth movement. Okay. And also there's a great technology out there called BiTap, where you can get these tappers, these electronic tappers that you can put to your wrist or ankles, and you can just put those on. And this just helps, it gives you kind of some biohacking to reduce activation in the brain. So like getting the BiTappers or going for a walk will create an environment in the brain for processing the trauma. Now, it's probably better that you have support, but not everybody has the resources to pay for, a trauma specialist, right? So it's important that you feel like you have some resources, because it can bring up some stuff and get you a little. So you wouldn't want to, maybe this is obvious, but you wouldn't want to do it while you're driving.
Right.
You wouldn't want to do it when you're around a lot of people where it's a stimulating environment. You kind of want to be out in nature or in a private space where there's not going to be intrusions. Okay. You would want to bring in some bilateral stimulation like walking or things like that, or these tappers, so that you're creating a brain environment to minimize the possibility that you're going to get blasted and fragmented.
Mm.
Okay. And also have a kind of, don't be in a situation where you have to run to an appointment after.
Yeah,
you know
totally.
so provided that this is called clearing the space. You got to make a space for it, create an environment for change, make sure that you're safe and warm and well fed and things like that. And then yes, you can think about, I would say, don't work with the most intense traumatic memory first. Start with just a difficult moment in your life, like a conflict with a partner or something like that, so that you can get some practice,
Yeah.
and before you go into the deep end, hang out in the shallow end first for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a good way to put it into action is that you can kind of toggle back and forth between the bad memory and a good memory. So let's say that you and I were doing some work. I already brought in this image of you being 5, like a happy memory when you were 5. Okay. So what I would tell you then is, okay, let's have you get these tappers or go on the walk, and let's have you work with this negative memory for a bit. Hold it in your mind's eye. See the scene from a distance first, and just feel your body. Feel the
Mm-hmm.
sensations in your body as you watch the memory. Okay. And then just stick with it for a bit as you walk or you're with the tappers, and then focus on the good memory. Okay. Then focus on the memory then when you're 5 years old. And so that because the brain, is all about information flows, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top, and other, center to periphery, periphery to center. And negative experiences, kind of lean towards the right side of the brain. Positive experiences kind of lean towards the left side of the brain. So what we're doing is we're actually encouraging information flow, and we're actually kind of changing the memory a little bit by adding some positive vibes into the negative vibes. We're like cooking a soup, right? We want to have all the ingredients from, dialed in, and want to add the positive into the negative and process the negative with the positive.
I see. So it gives some perspective and it helps mix the feelings a little bit. Let's take a quick break. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We all go through ups and downs, but sometimes it's hard to ask for help. The truth is, reaching out for support is a sign of strength, not weakness. Whether you're navigating stress, relationships, or life changes, therapy can give you the tools to heal, grow, and find balance. With BetterHelp, therapy is entirely online, making it both convenient and accessible from the comfort of your home. You'll have access to over 30,000 credentialed therapists, each with unique specialties to support your journey. And if you ever feel like you need a new perspective, switching therapists is free of charge. BetterHelp has helped over 5 million people worldwide, offering affordable therapy designed to meet you exactly where you are whenever you need it. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/TLL to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/TLL. Tell us other ways you help people go through, process something. So is it, like you said, one of the examples is like maybe you express what needed to be expressed at the time. Or maybe another example might be maybe see it from a different perspective. I guess what are the ways that you think could help people process their past?
From a body perspective, the body goes into shutdown responses in fairly predictable and patterned ways across humans. Okay. And this isn't just with trauma. I mean, it's also with, let's say we get in a conflict or an argument, which a lot of people, of course, we're humans. We get in conflicts and arguments, especially with close family members. It's the holiday time, so buckle up, folks. So intense things happen. And when intense things happen, whether it's traumatic or not, the body starts to shut down in fairly predictable and patterned ways. Okay. One of the most common things to happen is that the limbs shut off from our awareness. Okay. So what you'll notice when things start to get intense, and it doesn't matter what intensity, it could be conflict, it could be as you build towards orgasm, it could be a traumatic event, the body will start to shut off the awareness of its limbs. Okay, so what your feet start to get numb and unavailable to consciousness. Your hands start to become a little bit disorganized. I mean, imagine being in the middle of an argument and then trying to sew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like good luck with that one, right? You're going to be poking yourself in the finger, right? And it's because the limbs are starting to shut off a bit. So one of the things to think about is, you got to get the body moving.
I see.
And that's one of the things that often happens, of course, in therapy, but in so many different situations, the legs shut off in particular. So we got to get those legs moving. Okay. So get out and stomp. Okay. Or go to a kickboxing class. Okay. Or get those arms moving in creative ways. Okay. Even art, the expressive arts and arts are very powerful for healing, so that's one really common thing, is that the limbs shut off. And another really common thing is that we just stop breathing. I mean, obviously not literally stop breathing,
Yeah.
but the capacity of our lungs and our diaphragm to have expansive breaths goes down and down and down and down when stress compresses. It makes us scrunch and squeeze and squint. Okay. So, and a primary place for that is, of course, in the diaphragm and the breathing mechanism. So breath is a very powerful tool for change. Very powerful tool. And what you'll notice when things get intense is that your breathing will start getting compressed. So you work on getting a little bit more awareness about your breathing flows and your breathing rhythms, so that you can then change that tendency to scrunch and to squint when things get intense.
Totally. You also mentioned like how there's so many artistic modalities or even physical things like dance or yoga or drama therapy that can help us process trauma. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to bring into your imagination, listeners, for those of you who are listening to this, bring into your imagination children that are at play, children that are playing. Okay. Children that are immersed in play have access to a type of emotional intensity, spontaneity, imagination, and they play big, right? You be the dragon and I'll be the unicorn. Okay. And there's an expansiveness to it. There's a beauty to it. There's so much energy and vitality, right? And then, as we get, kind of scrunched into our seats in the educational system and stuff like that, we have to sit like this. Often one of the consequences, of course, is that we lose the capacity to express the intensities inside of us. And so they pop out in weird ways in conflict and, in relationship, or, they have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So this is one of the beauties of drama therapy and the expressive arts, is it really makes a space for the inner child, if we want to call it that. so that it's not popping out. These intensities aren't popping out in non-creative ways. So, I mean, in a way, I think that's a simple way of looking at it. It's making a space for the inner child, but it's
Oh,
more
yeah.
than just about the child. It's making a space for the great intensities that often take us over and grab this steering wheel in the direction of bad stuff. So drama therapy gives a space for it to kind of play itself out creatively on the dramatic healing stage, so that it's less likely to cause trouble elsewhere in life.
Yeah, totally. When you say intensity, do you just mean like the emotions that come with life, right? Like, because a lot of people have these emotions, but it's not maybe acceptable, or it's not like you don't want to outburst on
Yeah.
someone. People need an outlet somewhere, somehow.
An outlet, exactly, like a pressure release valve.
Yes.
So the expressive arts are exactly that. I think it's a great way to think about it. It's a pressure release valve, because there's so many rules of engagement, and there's so many optics, and there's so many, so many ways to get canceled, and so many ways to F up these days, that we need a place to just let loose. And some people turn to sports for that, and and other places that, because sports are intense, right?
Yeah.
But that's just, usually a lot of times sports is that you're just watching it out there, or like in the case of watching a movie, you're watching the movie or the show out there. And in some ways, you kind of get to run some of the juice of the intensity, of the emotional intensity. It's certainly activating your brain as such, but it doesn't get the body involved in the actual intensity. In sports, yes, a bit, but it's not, but sports have limitations. They don't make much room for real spontaneity of the type that children really do. The real imaginative, creative stuff. Sure, there's going to be some pressure release valve stuff. Great, go do it. Go do the sports. Bring that aggression out, and that aggression it can be creative, because it's like, everybody's challenging each other to do better and stuff. But insofar as, being an optimal human in the creative sense, then we need to actually actively exercise creativity, the creative expression of emotion, and do it consciously, and do it in an environment that's fun and deep.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that, right? Environments that are playful, deep, intense, and safe. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Deep being one of the things that is left out of sports, right? It's not particularly philosophical or something like that. It's not really integrated with the deep stuff of meaning that exists in being a human, right? It's just kind of trying to win.
Yeah. And does this matter whether you're doing this creative expression yourself or with a group? Because drama therapy is that it's social, right? With others. I would imagine, like for me, my creative outlets are like singing, like belting songs in my car is a great release, or like
Yeah.
dance is a big part of my life. Does the social element matter though?
Let's talk about a couple of principles from trauma resolution therapy. One of them is, you can't really heal a relational trauma, okay, by yourself. Okay. You can't really meditate yourself out of a relational trauma. Only so far that you can get on your own before you need to be in the environment that originally hurt you. But you can get far.
Yeah.
You can get
Yeah.
far. So I grew up in Minnesota, and there wasn't, at least in my family system, there wasn't much room for doing anything other than play football, and sure, we had fun, and I had a loving family system and everything, but there wasn't much space for creative self-expression. Like boys in, the early 80s or whatever, when I grew up in Minnesota, weren't like encouraged to go to a dance class, or
Yep.
go to a poetry event. I mean, not where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually really healing for me when I found dance, and I just danced by myself for quite some time. And there was a tremendous amount of healing for me in that, because I thawed out. I had Minnesota freeze. It's not just Minnesota, right? It's the freeze of all these rules that are put upon boys, differently than the rules that are put upon girls. Of like the limitations of what my body should and shouldn't do. It definitely shouldn't cry. And it shouldn't do playfulness like a kid, really, unless you've had 12 beers. That's fine. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
there's that weird kind of sensibility that you hear it out in culture a fair bit. Like, oh, I don't dance unless I've had, 6 beers or whatever it is. So I thawed out on my own a lot. And the next stage then for me was to meet the next threshold, which is then to go back into into a social milieu, social situation that brought all this stuff up for me about being in the optics.
Yeah. Yeah, you had to heal that.
It's part of the healing. Back into this kind of optical space of surveillance, because this is one of the things, right, that we're put upon. Like, just the surveillance apparatus. We're being looked at. We're being evaluated. We're being judged. And to bring now my capacity to dance, which I've learned to do on my own and express myself, and then feel that, and a whole nother layer it's like, oh boy, here we go. And then another decade of going through that. And
yeah, I think you can do so much healing by yourself, but then when you put it in practice in the real world, there's more, like, it continues, right? Kind of like a people pleaser continuing to stand up for themselves and set boundaries. It's like you have to take the action, and that's part of the healing as well.
Yeah. And that's why a somatic framework is really useful, because it's like, we get into these habits, and habits are hard to change. They really are. And these habits exist as neural networks in the brain. So we have to have a practicing space. So that's why I'm so committed to, when a person leaves my office, they got to have stuff to do. Why? Because we actually have to change neural pathways, and that takes work.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you can't just expect to be healed just thinking about it. You have to actually live it.
Yep. There's a timeless fantasy, though, right? That, that there's a holy grail out there. There's a guru that they can go to, and then, or like a healer who can just wave their hands like this. Or now it's like the psychedelic substances. You just take the psychedelic substance, and like, then you'll come back and everything will be cool. It's kind of like a timeless holy grail fantasy, right? That people just keep on buying that fantasy.
Yeah, but you come back and you still have to do the work.
Precisely.
Before we go on, a quick word from our sponsor, Quip. Let's talk about small upgrades that make a big difference, like the Quip 360 electric toothbrush. Taking care of yourself isn't about doing everything, it's about doing the right things. Ask any dentist and they'll tell you most people brush too hard. Quip 360 has a handy built-in sensor and light to make sure you're brushing with optimal pressure to keep your gums healthy and clean. And if you're on the sensitive side, you'll love just having one button for 3 intensities: gentle, daily, and deep clean that get the job done your way. All right, so just for listeners of the Lavendaire lifestyle, get 20% off site-wide and a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/TLL. Free your mouth today and save 20% off site-wide, plus a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/TLL. That's getquip.com/TLL. You have an upcoming book, Visionary Somatics. Tell me about what inspired you to write this book, and I guess the key message that you're hoping to share here.
On my path to healing myself, I encountered all sorts of healing systems that I like to call aromatherapy through Zen. And so I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. I'm a multimodality practitioner. And it's been that way. It just must be my style or something like that, where I go from one method to another, one method of healing. I don't become married to it for that long. I guess it's just my style or something. And then what I developed over time is just a lens for noticing where limitations to that modality were on a theory level and on a practice level. Okay, so in trauma resolution work, I'll just give you an example for that. In trauma resolution work, one of the big important principles is that we have to take things slow. We have to take, in order to process a trauma adequately, things need to slow down. Those are the breaks, right? We need to create an environment of safety. Things need to slow down. We need to process through the intensities of that memory slowly. So all sorts of approaches have developed around that principle. Okay. The principle of we need to take things slow. And I've come to call these approaches containment approaches. Okay. Makes sense, right? Let's create a container and make sure that it doesn't spin off into chaos and too much fast processing and so on. We need to keep things kind of slow and contained, as opposed to very expressive and big and intense. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I realized that for myself, I also needed these expressive practices. I needed to have a container that was big, that wasn't just about containment, that wasn't just about slowing things down, that there was an environment where I could be big and express big emotions and, in essence, be, cathartic, cry and be poetic and be mythological and be big and so on. And what I started to see is that there's a split in the wider healing arts community between containment-based methods and cathartic-based methods, containment and catharsis. So like expression and containment.
Right.
And I got really upset with it, actually, Eileen. And in fact, that was the fundamental thing driving my doctoral work, is I wanted to figure out what the hell is going on here.
Why not both, right? Why not both for different times, different reasons?
Yeah, why not both? Why isn't there an environment where there's a kind of toggling back and forth between these spaces? And so I ran into all sorts of literature. I'm a neuroscience teacher and stuff like that. So and I just became obsessed with understanding the neuroscience of it. And in the end, I did all this complex research to understand that there's some pretty fairly simple things at play here. That during development, we have an aspect of our nervous system that wants adventure and exploration. And it wants to go off and find its limits. It's like mom is sitting on the bench or something like that. And I want to go out and explore that tree over there that's right on the edge of her vision. I really want her to be watching me. I want her to be celebrating me. I want her to be witnessing me and going all right, keep going, buddy. You're doing it. And that is the gas in the sympathetic system, when it's because the sympathetic system isn't just about defense or danger. It's about pressing the accelerator to go do joyful things and express vitality and wonder and stuff like that. So there's that kind of arc of adventure.
Yeah.
But then things can get overstimulating and scary over there because the heart rate is up and it's intense. And now we've met our limit and we need to come back to the caregiver and we need some containment.
I see.
Right? Can you see where I'm going with this?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because things have been overwhelming. We need another body there to help us to organize our experience, which is exactly what's happening in trauma resolution therapy. I'm helping somebody to organize their experience, slow things down, provide a container for them. But what I got so upset with is that there's this split, that the containment, creating a safe base, is only half the picture.
Yeah.
Before we have to figure out a way to put the gas on in a way that we feel delight and feel safety. So I would say that that's at the core of the book. Just this simple distinction, right? We need both. We need adventure and expanse, and we need containment. So the book offers like the most deeply pragmatic aspects of the book is like I'm offering a new trauma resolution model that I believe is version 5.0 or whatever. I like to say that I'm a geriatric millennial. And a lot of the trauma resolution models in vogue today were birthed by baby boomers and are kind of outdated.
I
Right.
see.
So I've taken the network neuroscience paradigm, which is the latest understanding of the brain, and sort of and packaged an update to trauma resolution, neuroscience, and treatment. So
Yeah.
that's one big chunk of the pragmatic elements of it. And I'm saying, okay, yes, containment, we need to do that, but let's understand it with an updated neuroscientific model, and I'd go on and on about how to work with mental imagery, how to work with the scene construction stuff that I've been describing, the neural structures involved in the default mode network, basically a mega update about how the brain processes experience, an update about what the ego is, neurologically speaking, how to work with that. And then a whole section, the other pragmatic section, is very much about the adventure pole, like training practitioners, because the book is also a platform for training body psychotherapists. You don't have to be a therapist to enter into the course. That's the cool thing, though. Body therapist, better to put it that way. So there's an expressive element to the course. So so that fundamental binary is in there. We need to have sophisticated containment tools informed by neuroscience. Okay. And like what to do when things get intense to contain. But also, here's a whole technology, here's a whole way of thinking about why it's so important to make a space for expression.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying the adventure side is healed through expression and what you were just talking about, the creative arts. Okay. I love that concept because again, you're tying those two binaries, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. I think they're usually taught in the sense of one's negative and one helps you heal from the negative. But
Exactly.
you're right. There's a positive side to the sympathetic where when we're excited, we're inspired, we're motivated, we're creative. It's obvious on one hand, but in this framework, it's something people don't think about is also necessary for humans.
Yeah, and I say, just to kind of my little catchphrase for that is, it's not just the fight flight system, it's the fight flight frolic system.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna remember that from now on.
I know, right? We got a frolicker, and we need a space to express that, uninhibited joy. And it's not
Oh
just the
yeah.
feel good feelings; it's also a space of expression for for the rage, for example, rage against the machine, as it were.
I'm just thinking of how like rock music can be so cathartic, right?
Yeah,
Or like
yeah, yeah.
screaming. Yeah, what I've learned today is like both sides of the nervous system have the positive and the negative. The parasympathetic healing also has the freeze, emergency brakes. Life is not just about like calm and healing and you're safe all the time because there's also the excitement side of it, the adventure.
Yeah.
So, okay, love it, love it.
Those are like the pragmatic pillars of the book. The rest of it is a lot of what I call embodied philosophy. Philosophy is almost by nature difficult. So I want to challenge thought paradigms of every kind because I think they get in the way. Belief systems get in the way. They serve and limit. Belief systems serve and they limit. This is why I'm interdisciplinary at my core. I'm
Yeah,
interfaith, if you want to put it that way, where I like to stay mobile. And in so
yeah.
doing, if we want to be free, this is the message that the book carries. If you have an interest in freedom, you need to figure out where your unconscious rigidities are. And so the embodied philosophy part is about exposing thought rigidities that directly impact the body. Thought rigidities make bodies rigid.
Give me an example of common thought rigidities.
Common thought rigidities would be, or thought rigidity would be how the Christian faith as a general principle has rigid beliefs about sexuality and how it should or should not be expressed. And that has direct consequences on pelvic muscles.
Yeah.
Okay. That has direct consequences on the tissues and the neurology of the pelvis.
I like hearing this from you. Not just not talking about the topic, but I've always believed that a person's body is reflective of like their inner self, like their personality even. Like people who are really rigid aren't flexible. Like people who are really like stubborn, hard-headed, or they can't see your way, they can't compromise, they're not like they can't touch their toes, they can't do certain things, while people who are their bodies are flexible, they're mentally flexible as well. It's something I've seen in my life and I intuitively believe, but I've never heard it from like someone who's a neuroscientist or who studies this stuff.
Yeah. Well, the other phenomenon is the mansplainer. And I'm not saying I'm immune and perfect and never a mansplainer. I mean, I'm a professor, for God's sakes, right? But let's take this image of the mansplainer, of somebody that is, pretty much in cognition, and they're taking up the juice, the relational juice of the moment, and grandstanding. And what are they doing? Their neurology and their musculature of their face and their mouth is getting all of this energy flow, mitochondrial energy flow or whatever. It's like all just kind of stimulated and expressed through here and through cognition. But what does that create? That creates a rigid block, okay, and a wall between the potential integration between cognition, thinking, and emotion, feeling, and all sorts of rigidities in the belly, because so much about the belly and the embodiment of the belly is about feeling, specifically feelings of surrender. And mansplainers need to just shut up and surrender and develop their receptors to feel another person, right? To feel their belly. And that it entails a type of surrender and a type of softening. Okay. So then we're back to this image of rigidity versus, kind of surrender and receptivity and the capacity to vibe with another person, which mansplainers like categorically can't, right? Because they have this rigid split between thinking and feeling.
Yeah. So you're saying like the softness of the belly is relative to like how much surrendering you do in your life.
Exactly. And almost every kid loves swinging on a swing at the playground. Yeah. That feeling of when you're falling, that feeling in your belly,
Yep.
there's a sense of falling. And, that falling is a type of surrender. And kids experience that as joyful.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, as we get indoctrinated into hierarchies and the be a man box or be a woman box or be this box or be that box, that joyful sense of surrendering and falling, okay, somehow gets displaced upwards, and not even displaced, it gets circumvented, okay, so that the feeling of surrender or falling is equated with anxiety, that
fear.
I'm gonna lose face, that I'm gonna be wrong, that I'm not, I'm not powerful, or I'm not important, or I'm not this or not that. So then the person has then equated falling and surrender, i.e., softening the belly, because the belly is such a vulnerable place too. And they develop a kind of phobia, a kind of body phobia about going down in there. Because what? Because if I fall into, and one of the phrases that I throw around a lot is that a lot of men literally die of grief. Why? Because they can't surrender and fall into the vulnerability of what it means to be a human, what it means to be a man, navigating a world where things hurt a lot. They just do, right? And so we develop this armor, especially in our belly, and guys just hold and they hold and they hold and they hold. And they're just afraid that if they fall into their sadness, that they're never going to come back. So they just don't. And it just gets rigid and rigid and rigid and rigid and rigid.
And then that becomes physical manifestations of
colon cancer. I'm not making a direct link here. I'm not saying, oh, this is a 1-to-1.
Right.
But it's a factor. If you don't have good circulation and flexibility in your abdomen and in your pelvis, I mean, it kind of makes sense that you get a swampy scenario.
I'm not aware of like the newest studies, but you're saying that in research, it's been like these connections have been made, right? Our emotions to our body, the bodily reactions that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
like hardening of your belly or like.
It's in the literature. I'll give you an example, and it's an example that I develop at length in the Visionary Somatics book. One of the central neural structures that I talk about is called Grand Central Station of Emotion. Grand Central Station of Emotion. And it's in the middle of the limbic system, in the middle of the midbrain. So it's in the middle of the middle, right? Mm-hmm. You know, obviously there's a reason why the researcher called it Grand Central Station of Emotion, because all the major emotions, you know, kind of fluctuate through this core area of the brain. It's called the periaqueductal gray. Okay. Now, in the periaqueductal gray, there's neurons there that project directly to hubs in the brain that have connection with the pelvic control nuclei in the pelvis and in the lumbosacral plexus. So if somebody has a sexual trauma, for example, okay, all sorts of horrible things are happening with the pelvis, obviously. And it's a deeply emotional experience that involves dissociation. It involves thwarted impulses in the legs and the pelvis, thwarted impulses here, you know, to kind of like say stuff. Or I've even had people that have said, I want to bite the guy. You know what I mean? When we're talking thwarted impulses, this is primordial stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we are mammals. So like when we're in a situation like this, we're going to scrap. We want to scrap and get the heck out of there however we can. And one of the primitive things in our nervous system to get out of a horrible situation is through a biting response. You know, and then that just gets bit back, right? And then that person ends up, you know, leaking aggression all over the place because they've held the aggression. So they become passive aggressive. But you know, the whole point of this is, yes, exactly. There is neurological evidence.
Like clear connections.
There's connections all over. It's all interconnected.
Yeah, I think this is what a lot of traditional healing modalities have spoken about. But I think science I think it's just catching up to be so mainstream that people understand, oh, I like my body tightens because of certain emotions, certain traumas, or like everything's interconnected, the mind body. It might seem obvious to you who has studied this for many years, but I think for many people, it's like a new concept.
Yeah. And the great traditions of the world's spiritualities and religions, they converge. And I talk about this in the embodied philosophy aspect of it. They converge. It's not obvious at first. You have to think and do the difficult work to see where they converge. Mm-hmm. But like, for example, you have the San people of Africa who do basically all-night dances as a healing event. They enter into kind of a trance state, and they get into this kind of wild, intense expression so that they can then heal their body. That's that adventure thing. We're going cosmic. It's a cosmic thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We're going beyond, you know, the structural thing of a day where people are making, you know, baskets and doing things that are, you know, mundane, and we're going cosmic. Of course, it's going to look quite different, but if you put on the lens of looking for what's similar, you can go to Pentecostal Christianity and the practice of speaking in tongues. Have you ever seen this stuff, the speaking in tongues? Where there's speaking in tongues is this kind of sounds like gibberish, and it's framed as a being taken over by the Holy Spirit, essentially. Right. And then so there's like all this weird sort of mumbo jumbo and nonsensical stuff coming out of the body because it's just the spirit coming through. Mm-hmm. And then the spirit expresses and things like that. And so we could put on a lens and look for the differences and say, wow, these are just completely different belief systems from completely different epochs. Or we could put on the lens of looking for what's similar. This is the human just trying to express the intensities that have us,
It's a
right?
release.
It's
Yeah.
a release. And it often shows up in anxiety in the modern world, that we just hold and keep things tight in relationship to the optics and curate everything so that it's all well polished. And, both of us are podcasters and we curate. And, one of the consequences of that, we just end up being held. And we need these wild spaces. We
Yes.
need spaces to discharge and hit the pressure release valve. Otherwise, we're going to be, stingy with our kids, or, kind of with our partners, or like your work collaborators and stuff like that. And it ends up just being a bunch of anxious neurotics running around forcing opinions into each other.
Yeah. That's why joy, like having some joy or some outlet in your life is so important. It's like I think of like festivals and concerts, which I love because it's when you see people, it's not just about, oh, they love music or they love dancing or they want to hang out with their friends. It's no, like it's a spiritual experience. It's good for our spirit to literally release in that way and to do it in community.
Everybody needs a scapegoat.
All right, Brian, I think to wrap up the podcast today, my final question for you is if you were to leave the listeners with one message, an insight or piece of advice, what would that be?
Find a place for undomesticating yourself. And what I mean by that is, just get out in nature. Create a place for expression for yourself. Turn towards the arts. Go out there and adventure. Take risks. But probably most of all, if you feel like you've forgotten a bit how to play, take play seriously. Okay. The greatest neuroscientist in my books, or one of them, basically says that the path towards integration in the brain, and to me this would extend into culture, is to figure out how we can play together again.
Yeah, love that.
Can't stress it enough.
Okay, so lastly, where can our listeners find you online?
So my brand is called The Somatic Doctor. Okay. And that's my website, somaticdoctor.com. It's also my Instagram identity is hashtag The Somatic Doctor. And I'll be producing videos and stuff like that and eventually I'll be running a training for people that want to train in this stuff. So be on the lookout for that. It's in the pipeline.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brian, for today's conversation and giving us so much insight on somatic psychology. It really excites me that this is becoming more of a thing and that more people are aware of it because it's so important. So thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Good to meet you. Hope to talk again.